Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction Company taking a look at some of the guns that they're going to be selling in their upcoming June of 2017 regional auction. And today we're going to take a look at a pair of U.S. military .22 caliber practice rifles. Now, these originated from, well, these were developed in the 1920s, and the U.S. military really took a keen interest at that point in marksmanship. It kind of always has. But in the aftermath of World War I, it was seen as really more important than usual to make sure that the American Army was up to proper marksmanship standards. And as a result, in 1919, then later Major General Julian Hatcher started development work on a .22 caliber version of the 1903 Springfield. The idea was to use a standard Springfield receiver, something they could pull just straight off the production line, and adapt to a .22 caliber service rifle. Now, this would be used for practice and small bore competition, and at the same time they were also developing .30-06 caliber marksmanship rifles. So the US, of course, had its own national matches, and there were also international shooting competitions that the US participated in. The US military sent members to. We had the DCM, the Department of Civilian Marksmanship, that was established to help promote proper, good rifle shooting skills among the population at large, so that should there ever be another major war, the recruits that were coming into the military would already have fundamental marksmanship skills. Anyway, Hatcher put together a rifle. It was prototyped in 1920, went into production in 1922, and it was used for several years, but it really kind of wasn't the best rifle it could have been. And so they actually, in 1925, they brought on John Garand, the same guy who developed the Garand semi-automatic rifle, and tasked him with improving the .22 caliber, the M1922. And what he came up with was the M1922M1, or first modification. And we have one of those right here. This turned out to be a pretty good rifle. The changes he made were kind of subtle changes. He redesigned the magazine, for one thing, and it became a flush-fitting magazine in the bottom of the rifle, and then redesigned or changed the specs of the barrel and the chamber to make for a more accurate and better shooting rifle. This lasted for a while, but come the mid-1930s, 1934 specifically, it went back and made some more modifications to it. There had been it was still somewhat flaky as far as reliable function, feeding, extraction, and ejection. And this wasn't a fundamental problem for its use, because a small bore target rifle like this isn't something that you're trying to shoot super fast on a timer. It's marksmanship, bullseye practice. And if the gun fails to eject or feed properly, well, you can fix it. Not a big deal, but it would be nice to get the gun a little more reliable. And that's a big part of what the M2, developed in 1934, did. In addition, it also it addressed a problem that the lug that held the bolt head on was apparently somewhat fragile and tended to break. So they fixed that. They made the gun a little bit more reliable for proper feeding, extraction, and ejection, and that became known as the M1922M2. Now, in total, about 20,000 or a little more than 20,000 of each of these rifles were manufactured. The M1s, if they came back into an armory for service after the M2, after 34, when the M2 had been adopted, they were typically retrofitted and brought up to the new modern standard. And production would run until 1942, when the Army decided that this was a little bit more expensive and more complex than they really needed for a .22 caliber training rifle. Of course, by 42, the pressure of World War II is getting more substantial. They have a lot more guys that they have to be training, and maybe you don't need something that's quite this good. The level of skill of the recruits and the limited amount of time that they're able to spend in fundamental marksmanship practice maybe doesn't justify a really nice rifle like this. So the US would go on to look for some less expensive alternatives, and we'll talk about that in a separate video. At any rate, these were sold through the DCM, the Department of Civilian Marksmanship, until 1940, and then of course continuing production for the US military until 42. Why don't we go ahead and take a closer look? I can, if nothing else, show you exactly what the changes to the bolt mechanism were. A lot of people may not realize that John Garand wasn't just some inventor who sold the idea for the M1 to the US government, he was actually a longtime career employee of Springfield Armory, back when Springfield Armory was actually a legit government-run armory. Today, it's just a commercial trade name. At any rate, our markings on this one are US Springfield Armory, and then this is the first one, M1922M1. It is, of course, caliber 22, and it is one of the later guns produced, 17,000. So just like their regular 1903 Springfield barrels, Springfield Armory did mark and date the barrels for these 22 rifles. So this barrel was produced or marked in November of 1928, and that gives us a pretty good relative date for the rifle. The follow-up improvement M2 has pretty much the same markings, just they actually got rid of the M1922 part, and they just called this a caliber 22 M2. And this one is a relatively early production, serial number 5400 or 5500 almost, with a corresponding barrel date of October 1935. These rifles were fitted out with a very nice, precise rear aperture sight or peep sight. We have our elevation adjustment right here. So, see, I can click that elevation slider up, and then I can do the same thing for windage with this adjustment knob right there. These were not normally used with optical sights by the military, but of course a lot of them were sold on the civilian market, and this particular one has been drilled and tapped for a scope mount. Now the easy visible difference between these rifles is the bolt throw. So on the M1, if I open the bolt, it's going to come all the way back out of the receiver, just kind of like you would expect. However, if I open the M2, it only travels back this far. And both of these, once they get to the rear of travel, have a little bit of a spring-loaded ejector, and that's what's actually going to kick the cartridge out of the rifle. Now I can take these bolts out by opening the standard bolt release on the receiver, and then the bolt just comes right out. And with the bolts out, we can see the changes that were actually made. And they're basically the guide rib here, the lug right here, which connects the bolt head to the bolt body, and the cocking piece back here. So on this, the M1, this is our ejector. It's going to hit the bolt stop at the end of travel when the bolt's fully open, and that's going to kick the case out. On the M2, that was lengthened because having a shortened bolt throw means that you're simply carrying the cartridge for a much shorter distance, and it's just more likely to be reliably ejected as a result. Then we also have this attachment lug, so I can push down on this spring, rotate that, and remove the bolt head. That's our firing pin right there. This seems like a pretty nice system. It allows you to access the firing pin easily if you need to for whatever reason, cleaning or replacement. However, apparently this lug mechanism was relatively fragile, and that's why they went ahead and replaced it with the M2. And the M2 system is not easily removable. So, stuck together, don't let the trainees get into the workings of the rifle. The M2 then also has this knurled disc on the back, which allows you to recock the action, or the firing pin, if you had a light strike on a cartridge or a dud cartridge. The earlier M1 just has a standard 1903-like smooth cocking piece. Lastly, we can take a look at the magazine. It does fit nice and flush down in there. This textured thing is the release button, so push that down, and then you can pull the magazine out. Just a very simple magazine. It holds 5 rounds, and that's it. And one last thing, both of these rifles are marked on the left side of the barrel, long rifle cartridge only. This refers to the 22 long rifle as opposed to 22 long or 22 short. In theory, you can fire the shorter cartridges in a 22 long rifle chamber, but what will happen is you will start to get fouling in the front end of the chamber, and if you do that too much, you will then start to have trouble fully seating a 22 long rifle case. The case will get jammed in against the powder fouling up in the front end of the chamber, and that leads to problems. So, especially from a military perspective, the simple solution is don't let anyone fire the short cartridges. only use .22 long rifle. Well, these are no longer available through the DCM. The civilian marksmanship program does still exist, and they do have the same mission to promote marksmanship skills in the United States, but these are now pretty collectible rifles and not being sold by the DCM. So if you would like to have one, they do come up for sale here and elsewhere. I have links to these two specific ones in the description text below, and there are a couple other M2s at least. There might even be another M1 in this auction. So if you're interested in those, do some exploring through the catalog, and I'm sure you can find them. If you'd like to bid on either of these or anything else in the catalog, they have a pretty cool, pretty simple interface right through Rock Island's website. You can do that or place a bid over the phone. Either way, hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.